Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Giant Ghost King was a profound schemer and expert strategist. That much was possible to see from the game he had played with the three great clans back in Giant Ghost City. Heart-pounding with fear, Bai Xiaochun turned back to watch what was happening on the battlefield. After all, he found it hard to believe that the Giant Ghost King would so blithely shoot himself in the foot. My old pal Giant Ghost is a wily old fox, that's for sure, he told himself. However, he hoped that the Giant Ghost King could actually be a bit more wily than he normally was. Otherwise, Bai Xiaochun was certain that he would end up losing his poor little life. Even as he pondered the possible outcomes, the Giant Ghost King's cool voice echoed out into the area. "How's that speed of yours doing?" Even as the words left his mouth, the girl's pupils constricted, and her face fell. In the process of absorbing the full destructive power of the Giant Ghost King's black sun, she had lost several bodies. Although she had survived, even she could not quickly absorb all of that power. As a result, she was now much less quick and agile than she had been before. Furthermore, she was now spread out into the form of a sea of blood, which essentially meant that she was locked in place. Although that wouldn't last for long, at the moment, she was incapable of going anywhere. She might as well have been sealed. And that had been the Giant Ghost King's plan all along. This opponent was too powerful, and shockingly fast. Furthermore, her origin was too terrifying to ponder deeply at the moment. He had known all along that ordinary methods could not be used to defeat her, and therefore, he had to take a bit of a risk. That was why he had summoned his world-exterminating sun. If the sun ended up destroying her, then all would be well and good. But if it didn't, then it would show that he was absolutely incapable of defeating her on his own, and that he needed help. And the truth was that the Giant Ghost King had long since used a demigod's secret magic to send word to the Grand Heaven Master. Therefore, he only needed to buy enough time for the Grand Heaven Master to come with reinforcements. If he could keep the girl locked in one place for long enough, that would give enough time for his allies to arrive and then join him in cutting her down. And yet, all of that was only 2/3 of his full plan. The final step of the plan had not yet been enacted. It was at this point that the Giant Ghost King suddenly reached out, summoning yet another gigantic ghost hand that stretched down from the sky toward the sea of blood. A vicious expression appeared on the face of the girl as she suddenly caught on to what the Giant Ghost King was doing. Feeling both humiliated and enraged, she let out a piercing shriek, causing the sea of blood to seethe as it surged toward the ghost hand. Bai Xiaochun was watching all of this happen, and when he heard what the Giant Ghost King just said, breathed a sigh of relief as he realized what he was up to. The Giant Ghost King really does deserve his reputation, he thought excitedly. Everyone else in the area also seemed to be filled with hope. A moment later, 4 figures suddenly stepped out of thin air. The first one wielded a massive battle axe. He was burly and tall, with a frightening murderous aura. He wore a black suit of armor, and a helmet with 2 long, curved horns sticking out on either side. He was the type of person who caused the air to shatter around him wherever he went. He was none other than the 9 Serenities King. The second figure was like a pile of flesh, fat to the extreme. And yet, that didn't seem to make him any less nimble. Every step he took caused windstorms to spring up. It was as if the will of the heavens would bow to him wherever he went, and make way for his passage. This person was none other than Shushan's father, the Spirit Advent King. The third figure moved with incredible quickness, and radiated a fearsome desire to do battle. He was surrounded by countless sword projections that seemed capable of crushing worlds. Rumbling sounds echoed out in all directions, and in the middle of it all was a middle-aged man in a long green robe. He was handsome, and stood tall and straight, with features that somewhat resembled Gong Sun Yi's. This man was none other than the War Champion King. The fourth figure came from Arch-Emperor City. He had white hair, and a wrinkled face, and yet his aura clearly placed him at the forefront of the other 4. He was the person whose every deed and thought could shake the wildlands. He was none other than the Grand Heaven Master. Behind the Grand Heaven Master were the 10 Heavenly Dukes, including Chen Haosong. All of them had extremely grim expressions as they strode forward. A short time earlier, they had received messages from the Grand Heaven Master, with information that caused dread to fill all of their hearts. A soul has appeared which is suspected to be from beyond the heavens. It has terrifying powers of absorption and consumption. It has an unknown cultivation base that can consume demigods. It was a matter that left the Grand Heaven Master feeling very shaken. Never could he have imagined that the person suspected of being Bai Xiaochun would be so powerful. After receiving the report from the giant ghost king, he hadn't wasted a moment to summon all of the most powerful experts to go deal with the situation. Although it all takes some time to describe, they all began to arrive in the roughly same moment that the giant ghost king once again began to fight with the young girl. The first person to reach the scene wasn't the Grand Heaven Master, it was the green-robed war champion king with his towering sword energy. A sword slashed through the air, creating an opening through which he stepped. The first thing he saw was the young girl in the form of a sea of blood, locked in place down below. Aberrant soul, how dare you cause trouble in the Arch-Emperor dynasty? The war champion king's voice was as cold as ice, and as he spoke, he extended his right hand. Immediately, the sky behind him grew blurry, and then a massive green greatsword materialized, which he grabbed and slashed down toward the sea of blood. A gold sword light appeared that seemed capable of ending all forms of life. Anyone who saw it would be shocked, regardless of the level of their cultivation base. Even devas, they all knew that if they were the ones to face this sword, they would be powerless to defend against it, and would surely perish. The giant ghost king chuckled. Although his face was pale from all the exertion, he immediately joined the war champion king to attack the enemy. The girl's expression flickered, and she began to howl piercingly. The sea of blood began to surge as two blood-colored hands stretched up from within it toward the war champion king and the giant ghost king. Intense rumbling sounds filled the air as that shocking sword made contact with the blood-colored hand. The hand grabbed it, but subsequently shattered into pieces. And yet, even as it shattered, it reformed. Bai Xiaochun was so shocked his scalp had gone numb. Every time he assumed this girl had reached her limit, she would do something even more shocking than before. Astonishingly, she was using these two blood-colored hands to fight against two demigods. She absorbed that black sun, which made her stronger. Although she fell into a bit of a trap, it could be that she did it intentionally, all to be able to consume more energy. Forcing his thoughts into order, he grabbed the recently awakened Mistress Red Dust and began to flee again. However, that was when a howl ripped through the air, along with a black battle axe, which slashed down toward the sea of blood. The power of that battle axe defied description. Bai Xiaochun could tell just from looking at it that it had the power to destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. Clearly, any diva who tried to accept a blow from that axe would be destroyed in body and soul. And yet, as the axe fell, the girl in the sea of blood let out another soul-trembling scream, whereupon a third arm rose up to meet the attack of the Nine Serenities King. 3 demigods were fighting this young girl. Things weren't over yet, though. The battle caused the sky to darken and winds to scream, and yet, that was when a cold snort ripped through the air. A gigantic sealing mark appeared, larger even than the sea of blood. As it descended from the sky, the eyes of the young girl finally focused into a very serious look. Rumbling sounds could be heard as a 4th and 5th blood-colored arm stretched up to deal with the sealing mark. That was when the Grand Heaven Master himself stepped out into the open from within the sealing mark. Heaven and earth trembled in response to his appearance. Fluctuations that vastly surpassed ordinary demigods rolled out as he extended his right hand and pushed down, causing afterimages of the magical sealing symbol to appear as more than 100,000 duplicate layers of it came into being. "Be destroyed," he said, his eyes narrowed. Then he pushed his hand down, and the 100,000 sealing marks descended toward the blood-colored hands with mountain-toppling, sea-draining power. When the hands met the sealing marks, the hands shattered instantly. The sealing marks destroyed them like a boulder crushing a drinking glass. At this point, Bai Xiaochun's heart began to pound with excitement. For the first time, he finally felt hope. "Nice one, Giant Ghost King. Your scheming powers are terrifying. You got the enemy stuck in place." Then the War Champion King and the Nine Serenities King attacked with full force. And yet, just in case they couldn't complete the job, the deadliest blow was launched, by the strongest of all, the Grand Heaven Master. This was Bai Xiaochun's first time ever seeing multiple demigods joining forces to attack like this, and it wasn't quite what he had expected. After all, the political climate in the Arch-Emperor dynasty was very delicate, and the demigods all had tenuous relations with each other at best. He could never have imagined that they would all join forces so quickly to deal with a foreign enemy. In fact, the Giant Ghost King had paid a huge price just to buy an opportunity for the others to gain victory. Then, the War Champion King and the Nine Serenities King were willing to play mere supporting roles, using their battle prowess merely to keep their opponent in check for a short moment. They even risked being injured to do so. Even the Grand Heaven Master, who already had the ultimate level of prestige in the Wildlands, didn't hesitate at all to unleash his most powerful blow to cut down the enemy. Although the fight seemed to be happening very quickly, there was clearly a high level of cooperation between these various demigods. Although they all had separate goals in their political struggles, when it came to fighting a foreigner, they were all on the same page. Bai Xiaochun was both moved and enlivened. Everything around him was shaking and rumbling, and there was also the shriek of the young girl as her blood-colored hands collapsed. Then, the sealing mark descended onto the sea of blood. The lands quaked, and yet the effect didn't spread very far. The Grand Heaven Master controlled everything perfectly to keep the effect localized. Even still, the resulting shockwave blasted out for tens of thousands of meters, destroying all plants and vegetation in the area. In the face of the blast, Bai Xiaochun and the others near him all fell back even further. At the same time, he anxiously craned his neck to see whether or not the girl had been destroyed. Even as he looked over, the Grand Heaven Master's 100,000 sealing marks caused the sea of blood to shatter. However, as it happened, a terrifying aura erupted out that sent Bai Xiaochun's emotions spinning. The Grand Heaven Master's face fell, as did the faces of the Giant Ghost King, the War Champion King, the 9 Serenities King, and the 10 Heavenly Dukes. Without the slightest hesitation, all of them prepared to fall back. And yet, before they could, an eerie, sinister voice spread out that seemed to be composed of countless other voices. Unfortunately, you couldn't quite pull it off. As the voice rang out, the sea of blood erupted. In the blink of an eye, it transformed into something like a blood sphere that grew larger with every moment that passed. Rumbling sounds echoed out, filling the wild lands to the point where it seemed like they might collapse as a result. Despite being some distance away, blood sprayed out of Bai Xiaochun's mouth, as well as from everyone around him. As for the Giant Ghost King, he had been severely drained, and was very weak, so he was sent tumbling backward, blood also spraying out of his mouth. Blood oozed out of the mouths of the War Champion King and the 9 Serenities King, with the Grand Heaven Master being the only one who seemed less affected. However, he was clearly having a tough time dealing with it, and his face turned a paler shade of white. But then, the exploding blood sphere suddenly began to shrink back down. Soon, it was a sea of blood again, and then it was half of its previous size. And yet, it was far more viscous than before. The young girl's face appeared again, and she laughed in sinister fashion. Truly a pity. However, I have to offer you people my thanks. You really helped me to absorb a lot. Well, you still have one more chance. If you don't take it, then I won't have any weakness at all. Bai Xiaochun's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. What was happening seemed almost completely unbelievable. 4 demigods, including the Grand Heaven Master, and they can't kill her. Even as Bai Xiaochun's mind reeled, the injured Giant Ghost King looked up with shining eyes. Then he reached out and waved his finger at the girl. Although he didn't speak even a single word, the War Champion King, the 9 Serenities King, and even the Grand Heaven Master all unhesitatingly unleashed the full power of their cultivation bases, causing demigod fluctuations to spread out as they charged again toward the sea of blood. The Grand Heaven Master, who actually occupied the most prominent position among them all, didn't seem to be paying attention at all to his status as he joined forces equally with everyone to try to kill the enemy. As the 3 demigods closed in, the Giant Ghost King waved his finger. In response, 10 blood-colored arms stretched up from the sea of blood. At the same time, the face of the young girl suddenly changed, going somewhat slack, as though her thoughts were muddled. Gasping, she looked at the Giant Ghost King. Another flicker of blankness passed through her eyes, and her thinking seemed to slow even further. In fact, the blood-colored hands also appeared to decelerate. This was the third part of the Giant Ghost King's plan, after the unleashing of the Black Sun. The Black Sun contained part of the Giant Ghost King's cultivation base power. After consuming that power, the girl couldn't digest it quickly, and therefore, the Giant Ghost King could use a special technique. Something that the first-generation Giant Ghost King had created, a divine ability used to control the Giant Ghost incantation. Bai Xiaochun was unfamiliar with that technique, but the weakened Mistress Red Dust was not. In fact, it was the very same technique that the Giant Ghost King had told her could help her achieve a cultivation base breakthrough. Now, the very same thing that occurred with Mistress Red Dust was occurring with the girl. Furthermore, the Giant Ghost King was exercising even stronger control. He was affecting all of the girl's thoughts. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened as he got an inkling of what was happening. Even as the young girl's mind was cast into chaos, and her blood-colored arms slowed down, the War Champion King, 9 Serenities King, and Grand Heaven Master unleashed the full power of their cultivation bases to attack her, joined by the 10 Heavenly Dukes. It was a deadly trump card attack. And yet, they weren't the ones to be delivering the final blow. By combining all of their divine abilities and magical techniques, they managed to shatter the blood-colored arms, which collapsed back down into the seething sea of blood. That was when, all of a sudden, a massive mountain of flesh appeared on the ground beneath the sea. That ball of flesh contained the power of a demigod, violent and explosive as it shot up into the air, destroying the ground that it left behind. The Grand Heaven Master and other demigods and devas attacked from above, and the ball of flesh attacked from below. There was no way for the sea of blood to avoid the blow. The ball of flesh smashed into the sea of blood, causing it to explode out into countless bits. Rumbling sounds filled the air as the ball of flesh sped up higher into the air, transforming into an enormous, fat man who was the Spirit Advent King. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide as he was once again shaken by how these demigods all worked together. This time she's definitely going to die. Even as Bai Xiaochun looked on nervously, the Grand Heaven Master and the other demigods and devas called upon their previous experience to prevent the sea of blood from scattering. Instead, they unleashed intense power to reduce it to flying ash. And yet, even as they destroyed the blood, all of a sudden, one particular clump of violet-colored blood suddenly rose up, moving with such incredible speed that it left behind nothing but afterimages. As it moved, it seemed possible to see something like an arm inside of it. Moments later, the arm vanished, to be replaced by the young girl's face, which was twisted with rage. "All of you are going to die," she shrieked, creating an indescribable sound wave that rolled out in all directions. The sound was like the wailing of a ghost, and filled the entire 500-kilometer area, seemingly cutting it off from the rest of the wildlands as surely as if an invisible blade had severed it. From the pressure radiating down, it didn't seem like a magical technique that originated from this world. The sky began to shatter, and the intense noise caused the air to ripple and distort. And yet, that wasn't even the most terrifying thing. As the ripples of the sound filled the area, numerous shadowy souls appeared. None of them seemed to possess intelligence, but they instinctually began to move toward that 500-kilometer area of sound, as if it were a holy place. In fact, all of the souls in the wildlands that were not controlled by some owner or master, began to fly in the same direction. The wildlands was a huge place, and there were so many vengeful souls there that no one could ever possibly count them. Furthermore, even with all of the soul cultivators in the wildlands using them in necromancy and cultivation, their numbers would continually be replenished, or even increase. Right now, all of the unfettered vengeful souls in the wildlands, regardless of where they were, all looked up and let out soundless shrieks. Then, they began to fly in the same direction, almost as if they had been summoned. It didn't matter how close or how far away they were. They seemed to be acting on instinct as they drew upon all the power they could to fly through the air. Some of them even began to teleport, lending them even greater speed than before. The place that all the souls in the wildlands were heading toward, as if it were a holy place, was the conglomeration of blood with the face of the young girl on it, and the 500-kilometer area that had become a lake of sound waves. The fact that a collection of sound waves in a 500-kilometer area could affect all of the wildlands was hard to even imagine. The giant ghost king's face fell. Ghost harmonization. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he staggered backward, helpless to do anything other than rotate his cultivation base to protect himself from the sound. He was trembling, seemingly hovering on the verge of collapsing completely, and it was the same with the War Champion King, Nine Serenities King, and Spirit Advent King, although all of them seemed to have it a bit better off than the Giant Ghost King. The intense level of the sound battered at the demigods, to the point where they almost couldn't handle it. She's just a soul clone, how could she be so powerful? And, what is the cultivation base of her true self? It must be beyond the demigod realm. This magical technique doesn't belong to our world. The War Champion King panted, madness rising up in his eyes, his sword chi erupting out to defend himself, and yet was completely suppressed by the sound. The Spirit Advent King's body was shrinking down, his fat disappearing, his facial features changing. Clearly, he wasn't holding anything back in his attempt to defend himself. If they were affected in such a way, there was little need to mention Chen Haosong and his compatriots. The 10 heavenly dukes were all trembling and withering up, their eyes filled with disbelief and terror. They were obviously completely powerless to defend themselves against this sound. The face of the girl in the violet glob of blood shrieked continuously, and as she did, a look of scorn appeared in her eyes. "This is legendary Archean divine magic. You're the subordinate of an Archean from beyond the heavens? But which one?" The Grand Heaven Master gritted his teeth as a glittering defensive shield of light sprang up around him. Although he was still capable of movement, he could only do so with great difficulty, and every movement of his feet made him feel like he had mountains attached to them. In response to his words, the little girl's pupils constricted. Then, despite the fact that she continued to scream, that voice which seemed to contain many voices rang out from within the conglomeration of blood. You're very well informed. Even as the power of the sound within the 500-kilometer area continued to surge, a sea of vengeful souls was converging on the area. None of them hesitated for a moment to pour into the sound and then into the young girl, making her even stronger than before. Everyone on the outside was shivering with terror, their faces pale and their minds reeling as if they had been struck by lightning. Never could they possibly have imagined that the most powerful forces in the wildlands, 5 demigods, would all join forces in attack, and yet fail to destroy this one strange girl. In fact, not only did they fail to kill her, but they were all placed in mortal danger. Father, Mistress Red Dust shouted, trembling in anxiety. She tried to wrest herself out of Bai Xiaochun's arms, but he held her tight. Get your hands off me, she yelled. But she was too weak, and no matter how she struggled, she couldn't break free. She could only watch her father stuck in a position of imminent death within that lake of sound. Furthermore, the giant Ghost King had been injured and weakened more than anyone else, and was clearly not going to be able to hold out much longer. Calm down, Bai Xiaochun barked, his eyes bloodshot. If you go over there now, you're dead for sure. Tears filled Mistress Red Dust's eyes. At the moment, she didn't seem at all like a mighty diva. She seemed heartbroken. Turning to Bai Xiaochun, she angrily said, "My father showed you immense kindness, Bai Hao. If you don't want to save him, fine, but how dare you stop me?" You, shut up, Bai Xiaochun shouted, unable to prevent the anxiety in his heart from showing in his bloodshot eyes. Perhaps he could ignore what was happening to everyone else, but not the giant Ghost King. Staring bitterly at the 500-kilometer lake of sound, he racked his brain trying to come up with ideas. At that point, the giant Ghost King coughed up some more blood, and then swayed weakly. Mistress Red Dust began to struggle even harder, and tears began to pour down her face. Father, apparently, the giant Ghost King heard her. He opened his weary eyes and looked over at Bai Xiaochun and Mistress Red Dust, and a faint smile could be seen. He opened his mouth as if to speak, and yet, just like everyone else in the same predicament as him, was working too hard to fight back against the sound to say anything. Mistress Red Dust redoubled her efforts to free herself. However, it was at that point that Bai Xiaochun threw his head back and roared. Depositing Mistress Red Dust off to the side, he shot through the air toward the 500-kilometer lake of sound. He simply couldn't stand idly by and not try to save the giant Ghost King. The giant Ghost King had treated him too well, and now was the time to try to repay that kindness. He couldn't just watch him weaken and die right there. Furthermore, the little girl actually didn't seem to be moving. "I'm gonna go for broke," he shouted. Go for broke. As he closed in on the 500-kilometer lake of sound, the giant Ghost King noticed. Although his gratitude was visible, he mostly seemed anxious. Get back, Bai Hao. This ghostess is using a magical technique from beyond the heavens. We can't move, nor can she. Just get out of here. Go back to the Underworld River restricted area. Speaking out loud caused his defensive powers to waver. A tremor ran through him, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. All of the onlookers got even more nervous than before, especially Mistress Red Dust, who trembled, and seemed like she wanted to speak, but was too overwhelmed by tears. However, Bai Xiaochun continued on as if he hadn't even heard the giant Ghost King. Soon, he was at the border of the Lake of Sound. Not bothering at all about what secrets he might reveal, he sent his turtle walk flying out from inside of him. Hefting it overhead, he charged into the Lake of Sound. As soon as he was inside, he dropped to the ground and put the walk on top of him. It was exactly the same method he had used back when he was in the river-defying sect, when the Middle Reaches sects had been fighting each other in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's legacy zone. It was the only tactic he could think of that might work. Of course, as soon as he stepped into the area of the sound, it affected him, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. However, when he dropped down and placed the turtle walk over himself, all of the sound around him disappeared. No sound? After a moment of feeling stunned, his blood-spattered face lit up with delight. At first it almost seemed too good to be true, but after a moment, he began to cautiously move forward. When the giant Ghost King and everyone else saw what was happening, they were completely taken aback. Everyone observing from afar was so shocked they forgot to breathe. As for Mistress Red Dust, she began to gnaw on her lips in anxiety. As he moved along, Bai Xiaochun realized that since he was on his way to save someone, he should try to make himself seem a bit braver. For that purpose, and in order to forestall any suspicions, he lifted the corner of the walk up and began to shout out as if in pain, making sure to be loud enough that everyone could hear him. Ow! OWW! Damn it! Oh, I'm not holding back anything for you, father-in-law. Ow, oh father-in-law, ow. Your son-in-law's poor little life is going on the line to save you. OWWWW. And thus it was that on that bitter and somber battlefield, Bai Xiaochun's voice echoed out for all to hear. He looked like a turtle as he crawled along, getting closer and closer to the giant ghost king. As for the onlookers, whether they were inside the lake of sound or outside, they all stared in complete shock. Even the girl in the conglomeration of violet blood was stunned. The giant ghost king was the closest to the turtle shell. Despite the intensity of the sound waves battering him, he could clearly hear the exaggerated cries of pain coming from inside, and it caused his jaw to drop slightly. Don't worry, Zemo. Even if I die, I'll definitely save our father. Ow. OWW. Everyone present was dumbfounded, including the giant ghost king, the war champion king, and even the 9 Serenities king. Although they were exerting all their effort to fight back against the sound attack, strange expressions still appeared on their faces. That was saying a lot, considering that this was a deadly battle in which no one knew who would come out alive and who would end up dead. Everyone felt incredible pressure weighing down on their hearts because of the bizarre little girl, and they were all wondering about what serious consequences there could be depending on how things turned out. And yet, in the middle of such a dramatic and bitter struggle, Bai Xiaochun showed up, yelping in exaggerated fashion as he crawled along underneath a turtle shell. It left everyone completely flabbergasted. The giant ghost king's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, and the spirit advent king's jaw hung wide open. There was little need to mention how shocked the Grand Heaven Master was. All eyes were glued to the hollering Bai Xiaochun as he and his turtle shell got closer and closer to the giant ghost king. Bai, the giant ghost king began. And yet before he could even think of what to say, Bai Xiaochun grabbed his leg, turned around, and began dragging him away. The giant ghost king was already weak enough as it was. When Bai Xiaochun began pulling on him, he didn't resist. He was like a statue underneath the eyes of all present, being inexorably pulled toward safety. Ow, OWW. I'll get you out of here even if I die in the process, father-in-law. Oh, OWW. Of course, Bai Xiaochun continued to shout as he dragged the giant ghost king along. Whatever works. That was what everyone was thinking, whether they were inside of the lake of sound or outside. As for the little girl, her eyes were blank with shock. Not even she could ever have guessed that Bai Xiaochun would use a method like this to drag someone to safety. If he only saved the giant ghost king, it might not have been a very big deal. However, just as he was closing in on the border of the lake of sound, the spirit advent king, who was being shrunken down with every moment that passed, took a deep breath and shouted, Bai how about you drag me out too? The expressions of blank shock on the faces of the onlookers grew even more pronounced, and many jaws dropped. Although the bitter and tragic feeling that had gripped the battlefield still remained, it was fading. Bai Xiaochun ignored the spirit advent king. Pushing forward with all the speed he could manage, he physically threw the still shocked giant ghost king out of the lake of sound. Mistress Red Dust hurried forward excitedly to catch him. Seeing that the giant ghost king was now safe, Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief and prepared to crawl out to safety. Hey, Bai Hao, don't you remember Shanshan? She's waiting for you back in Spirit Advent City. More odd expressions appeared on the faces of the onlookers. Feeling a bit annoyed, Bai Xiaochun looked out from under the turtle walk at the Spirit Advent King. Then he thought about how nothing had been done to block his path to the giant ghost king, so, gritting his teeth, he turned around and headed back in. More cries of pain could be heard as he approached the Spirit Advent King and then grabbed his leg just as he had the giant ghost king. Amidst the battering sound waves, he dragged the Spirit Advent King toward the edge of the lake and then threw him out. Grumbling curses echoed out from beneath the turtle walk the entire time. Spirit Advent King, you're so fat, can't you lose a bit of weight? I can barely move you, ow. The Spirit Advent King was feeling very embarrassed about it all. However, he continued to shrink as he moved along, until he was roughly the size of an ordinary person. That was when Bai Xiaochun threw him out of the lake of sound. By this point, the 10 heavenly dukes were feeling extremely anxious. Their cultivation bases were too low, making it impossible for them to even speak. All they could do was cast piteous, imploring glances at Bai Xiaochun. When Bai Xiaochun saw that, his heart softened. Whatever, you people all hate me, but I'm a generous guy. Besides, as the saying goes, if you're going to herd sheep, you might as well collect the whole flock. Sighing at how important his mission was, he continued to shout and holler as he crawled back and forth through the lake of sound. Before long, he had dragged away the dumbfounded Grand Heaven Master and the proud and arrogant war champion king, as well as Chen Haosong and the other devas. Everyone watched as Bai Xiaochun saved them all one by one. Before long, the only person left within the 500-kilometer area was the Nine Serenities King, who stood there with a blank look on his face. He had long since begun to curse inwardly. However, he quickly realized that Bai Xiaochun seemed to be ignoring him and saving everyone else. Although he knew about everything that had gone on between Bai Xiaochun and his son Zhou Hong, he didn't think that it would earn him treatment like this. At least a few people should have been left behind to accompany him. By this point, the little girl was about to go crazy, and her face was twisted with fury. She might have been able to accept the fact that her technique didn't affect him, but then he had gone and rescued everyone else. Even as she began to sink into hysteria, the Grand Heaven Master and everyone else settled down cross-legged and began to recover. By use of demigod's secret magic, the process went very quickly. Soon, the giant Ghost King didn't look weak anymore, and was mostly recovered. If nothing happened to interfere, it wouldn't be long before all of the demigods were back at peak battle prowess. Bai Xiaochun, the girl screamed. Everyone in the area went stiff at the sound of her voice, and Bai Xiaochun shivered anxiously. However, before anything else could happen, the Grand Heaven Master, War Champion King, Spirit Advent King, and Giant Ghost King all opened their eyes. 4 demigods all rose to their feet and strode forward to attack the 500-kilometer Lake of Sound. Meanwhile, the Nine Serenities King howled at the top of his lungs and went all out to join the other 4 demigods in the assault. Shocking booms rang out in all directions as the 500-kilometer Lake of Sound began to tremble and collapse. After only 10 breaths of time, it completely shattered. Blood sprayed out of the mouth of the Nine Serenities King as he staggered backward, visibly aged, and obviously seriously injured. As soon as the Lake of Sound collapsed, the Grand Heaven Master and the other demigods attacked in full force, unleashing one divine ability after another. In response, the little girl screamed, and the violet conglomeration of blood writhed as it took human shape. Then the girl waved both of her hands up into the air. As she did, the sky distorted, and intense rumbling sounds echoed out everywhere. All of the wildland souls which had been rushing in her direction increased their speed significantly, hundreds upon hundreds of millions of them all closing in on the girl. The sky grew dim from all of the howling vengeful souls. Soon, there were billions of them, swirling around the little girl like a cyclone. The souls soon began to take the shape of a face that filled the entire sky. It was the little girl, her eyes sinister and filled with anger and resentment that caused the entire world to tremble. "Nobody can save you," she howled, borrowing the voices of all of the countless vengeful souls to speak. At the same time, she opened the mouth of the face of souls, and a black wind sprang out. Shocking power filled the gusts of wind, power that caused the Grand Heaven Master and the other demigods to look on in shock. Bai Xiaochun also gasped, and began to back away. That wind carried the power to destroy everything in existence, and yet, before that could happen, a sigh echoed out, a sigh of profound ancientness. A figure appeared within the swirling black winds. He wore a long black robe, and at first, it was impossible to see his face. He was so old that anyone who looked at him would immediately come to the conclusion that he had just stepped out from profoundly ancient times. "Great-Grandpa Gravekeeper," Bai Xiaochun said, stunned. "Hell-Emperor," cried the Grand Heaven Master and the other demigods, expressions of profound reverence on their faces. When Bai Xiaochun heard what they were calling the Gravekeeper, his jaw dropped. Although all of this takes a bit of time to describe, it all happened in the briefest of moments. The Gravekeeper seemed to exist in a different dimension than the black wind, which didn't affect him at all. He strode forward until he was right in front of the enormous face of the young girl. Then he reached out with his ancient, withered hand, and pushed down onto it. When the Gravekeeper pushed his hand out, there was no screaming wind, nor any smoke or fire. However, the entire world seemed to go completely still and silent. The sky didn't tremble. The lands didn't quake. The winds which had surrounded the Gravekeeper vanished. As for all of the countless vengeful souls, their resentment seemed to vanish, and they prostrated themselves in worship to the Gravekeeper. Everyone who saw what was happening was shaken. As for the little girl, the souls which made up her face scattered as they too prostrated themselves to the Gravekeeper. Then, an enormous manifestation of the underworld river appeared, waves glistening as it filled the world. The countless souls which filled the area then began to float toward the river, like stars returning to their place in the sky. The face of the girl faded away, revealing the violet conglomeration of blood. A moment later, the face reappeared in the blood, eyes shining with strange light as she looked at the Gravekeeper. Then, she unleashed the very same technique that had destabilized the divine souls of the demigods, that which the Grand Heaven Master had referred to as Archean divine magic. So you finally decided to show up, Hell-Emperor. I knew it, I could sense traces of you on that Bai Xiaochun over there. I knew that if I followed him around long enough, he would lead me to you. Shocked looks appeared on the faces of all present in response to her words. At the same time, the same sound waves appeared as last time, except instead of spreading out for 500 kilometers, they were focused in an attack on the gravekeeper. The girl had previously mentioned Bai Xiaochun, but that had been a dramatic and frenzied moment, leaving people little time to contemplate the implications. But now, he who was like a god to the wildlanders had appeared, the Hell-Emperor. Therefore, the words which had just been uttered by the girl caused everyone to turn their gazes onto Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun, Grandmaster Bai is Bai Xiaochun? The soul cultivators from Giant Ghost City were all completely shocked, to the point where their jaws hung open. Bai Xiaochun, Chen Haosong and the other heavenly dukes had strange expressions on their faces as they looked over at him. The 9 Serenities King, War Champion King, and Spirit Advent King were all stunned. Only the Grand Heaven Master and the Giant Ghost King didn't have any reaction, as though this news wasn't surprising to them at all. However, mixed emotions could be seen on Mistress Red Dust's face. Although this possibility had existed in the bottom of her heart for a long time, she hadn't been willing to devote any thought to it. But now, having heard the little girl essentially say the same thing twice, it caused Mistress Red Dust to begin to pant. The fact that her own father had given her hand in marriage to Bai Xiaochun turned her world completely upside down. Bai Xiaochun's heart began to pound because of all the eyes looking at him. However, there was nothing he could do to change how events were playing out. After blinking a few times, he put on a blank expression, as though he didn't understand what was being talked about. Then he looked around as if trying to figure out who in the crowd was really Bai Xiaochun. In response, many strange looks could be seen on the faces of the others present. At the moment, Bai Xiaochun didn't have time to worry too much about what exactly everyone was thinking. At long last, he had realized why this ghostly girl had been following him for such a long time. She had been using him to find the Hell-Emperor. No wonder. Although it was a bit of a shock to find out that the Gravekeeper was the Hell-Emperor, when he thought about how mysterious the man was, it all made sense. When she said she noticed traces of Great-Grandpa Gravekeeper on me, was she referring to how he saved me from the Luokan clan? As Bai Xiaochun was wrestling with these thoughts, the girl's ghost harmonization erupted out, causing the sky between her and the Gravekeeper to shatter. The Gravekeeper sighed, waving his hand to cause the shattering sky to transform into a huge black hole. The black hole began to explode, releasing power that seemed capable of destroying the entire world. Thankfully, the same world-sealing net existed as had appeared when the Giant Ghost King unleashed his black sun. The illusory net easily dispersed the world-destructive power, and it faded away. The Gravekeeper shook his head and spoke in an ancient, weary voice, "I've been avoiding you at every turn. Why do you insist on hounding me? If you want me to stop hounding you, then open the world gate. Allow me to leave this place." Sound waves continued to stream out, destroying the air as they went along. However, the young girl's bizarre, echoing voice could still be heard. Her eyes were filled with focus, determination, and madness. Furthermore, there was no deceit in her words. She was not a person of this world. She had come from beyond the heavens, a discarnate soul who had fallen down into the world along with an enormous sword. She had once been confused and unintelligent, with no hope of ever regaining her senses. But then Bai Xiaochun had entered the fallen sword abyss, and she had consumed his medicinal pills. Her soul body had been stimulated, and her mental faculties had recovered. At that point, she remembered everything about her past. She found the world she was in a very strange place, and instinctively wanted to keep Bai Xiaochun next to her, considering that he had been the one to restore her mental faculties. However, despite the fact that her soul body was indestructible, her battle prowess wasn't sufficient. Because of that, Bai Xiaochun escaped. She had later escaped the fallen sword abyss to roam the world on her own, whereupon she learned more about the truth of where she was. She eventually came to realize that if she wanted to escape, if she wanted to get home, she needed the Gravekeeper to open the gate to this world. Unfortunately, she wasn't powerful enough to locate the Gravekeeper. However, she remembered the traces of the Gravekeeper that she had sensed on Bai Xiaochun. At that point, she came to the conclusion that Bai Xiaochun had been looked upon kindly by the Gravekeeper. And she also realized that if she followed Bai Xiaochun for long enough, that she would likely find the person she was looking for. And that was what led to the entire situation. It was also why she had sometimes even protected Bai Xiaochun. Unfortunately, after the labyrinth spell formation was activated, something unexpected happened. She lost track of Bai Xiaochun. No amount of searching had turned up any clues. Therefore, she eventually decided to impersonate him, all with the goal of luring him out into the open, and thus, getting access to the gravekeeper. It almost didn't matter how things played out, she would succeed. Furthermore, when Bai Xiaochun had attempted to flee earlier, she had not unleashed the killing techniques she was capable of, all because her true goal was to force the gravekeeper out into the open. When the demigods attacked, it was to further her main goal that she had summoned all the souls of the wildlands, in order to shake the foundation of the world. It was something she could not do in the Heavenspan River region. After all, the souls that existed only in the wildlands were the best tool for her to aid her recovery, and also the best advantage she had in a fight. More important than anything else, she had another friend out there somewhere. With such thoughts on her mind, she chuckled. Even as her ghost harmonization continued, she opened her mouth, causing the air behind her to distort as the enormous head of an evil ghost appeared behind her. The ghost immediately opened its mouth and lunged toward the gravekeeper. The evil ghost radiated battle prowess equivalent to a demigod, which left the Grand Heaven Master and everyone else in the area completely shocked. However, the appearance of the gigantic evil ghost only caused the gravekeeper to shake his head. With that, he extended his ancient right hand and pointed at the ghost head. All creation began to tremble. The air around the evil ghost then began to collapse, creating what appeared to be the shape of an enormous mouth, which instantly gobbled up the ghost. At the same time, the gravekeeper performed an incantation gesture and waved his finger at the girl. Wind, he said. It was one simple word, but when it came out of the mouth of the gravekeeper, it seemed to contain the power of the natural laws of heaven and earth. Almost immediately, the entire sky filled with a wind capable of destroying all living things. The terrifying power in that wind surpassed that of a demigod, and caused even the little girl's face to fall. As for Bai Xiaochun, his eyes went wide, and he gasped at how unbelievably powerful the gravekeeper was. The Hell-Emperor, he murmured to himself. Massive energy surged, energy that surpassed the ability of all onlookers to even react to it. When the gravekeeper uttered that single word, wind, it was as if all the wind in the world reacted with explosive fury. The world became a place of wind, with the gravekeeper being the eye of the storm, a mountain-toppling, sea-draining vortex that crushed toward the little girl. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.